So I wanted to just tell you how my Buddhist practice began, which was that some very dear friends of mine, Colin Walcott, who was a wonderful, one of the great percussionists, who passed away in the 80s, and Lanny Harrison, who was still one of my dearest friends and was working with me, talked about a Tibetan Lama that had come to New York, whose name was Trungpa Rinpoche. And so I had heard about him. And a good friend of mine, Barbara Dilley, who was a dancer with Merce Cunningham, asked whether I would come out to a new university. It wasn't actually called a university, it was called an institute at that time, that Trungpa Rinpoche had started in Boulder, Colorado, which was his idea of actually making an institute where a Buddhist practice, or any kind of spiritual practice, actually, because he had a wonderful seminars with Thomas Merton, people from all across the board as far as spiritual practice was concerned, and the arts, because he was also a poet, a calligraphist, and a playwright, and I think he really deeply, deeply felt the connection between Buddhist practice and the arts. And whether I would, so Barbara Dilley asked if I would come out and do one or two performances and teach there, so I did go. And I immediately felt this incredible connection to, again, the deep listening audience and the expansiveness of the vision. And I realized that as a young artist, a lot of the principles that were Buddhist principles were part of my aesthetic as an artist. So that in a way, I intuitively felt them, but I didn't really have a formal spiritual practice. I mean, my art has always been my practice. And I knew how energy came through, and I would prepare myself, for the whole day to perform, to allow this energy to come through. So some of the principles I think that I realized then were actually fundamental Buddhist principles were space, silence, stillness, elasticity of time and space, immediacy, and centered, kind of centered qualities. And this idea that if our minds, if we really actually can keep on working through the obstacles, everything is there for us already. We are born with everything that we need. And a friend of mine said, well, why don't you read Shambhala, Sacred Path of the Warrior by Trungpa Rinpoche? And I was like, okay. Or I was really more like, okay. It was really more of that. And then I read the book, and I just started crying from the beginning to the end. And I went to the Shambhala Center, and I started doing the Shambhala training. And that was enough for me at that point. The Shambhala training, he designed it, well, it comes from a tradition of Shambhala, which is a kind of mythical kingdom of an enlightened ruler, an enlightened monarch. And the tradition is that Buddha came, and he said to the king, why don't you let the monks take a rest period now, because I just want to teach you how to be an enlightened ruler. So it's more like a kind of, what would I say, homeowners kind of practice, not a monastic practice. It was designed basically for when there's hard times. The Shambhala teachings seem to come back up when the world is in a dark period, so it cycles around. So, and it's very simple and fundamental, simple shamatha vipassana practice, and very fundamental ideas of how to be a human being in this world, like an enlightened human being in this world. Enlightened citizen is, I think, the way that he would say it. So I did that for many years. And then in the late 90s, it felt time to take my refuge, because I felt that was my commitment, for this lifetime. And so I took my refuge with Khandro Rinpoche. And then in 2003, I took my Bodhisattva vow with Acharya Judith Leaf. So that was my way of entering this world that I'm so grateful for, that has made such a difference in my life. What I wanted to talk about a little bit is work as practice, at least in my experience. So it's two areas. One is the making of the work, and the secondly is what it's like to also perform. So I think the making of the work is very much, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this, is tolerating being in the unknown. Because I think that I've been working 50 years, and every time I do a new piece, I'm just terrified. I'm just terrified. So I think to myself, you've been working 50 years and you're still terrified, but that's the way that it is. Because I think if you decide that you're not going to make the same piece over and over again, which is another idea. There are some people that do that. It's more a product kind of idea, and a lot of concern about this is your way of doing things, and you want it to be unmistakably your way of doing things so people can recognize it very easily. That's a very different way of thinking about things. For me, it's more throwing myself into the universe or off a cliff, trying as much as I can, starting from zero with no assumptions or expectations, and just seeing if I can find something new and trying to throw the backpack of my past off. I mean, it's easier said than done because we all are the same person, but I mean, trying to just be very fresh. And, coming to beginner's mind, every time. You're stumbling around in the unknown. It's like being a detective trying to find a little clue or a seed. So, and then it's just very challenging. Beginning is very challenging. And then little by little, there'll be a moment of discovery, which is really what I live for, is these moments of discovery. There'll be a little moment of discovery, and you go, oh, this, I haven't heard this before, or this feels like something new. And then little by little, when these little moments of discovery happen, you start getting really interested and curious, and then curiosity takes over, and then the fear little by little goes away. So, I mean, that's been my experience and my process. Sometimes that fear period or half and half, the bardo between those two states lasts for a long time, and I'm working really hard. And what I notice is that, and especially the last maybe 10 or 15 years, is that this kind of miraculous thing happens where I feel that something is, what would I say? It feels like it's almost coming together on its own, and it feels like this thing, this entity, has existed in another dimension, has always existed, and that I'm just trying to open myself up enough to let it come forth. It's like being a midwife or something like that, like make yourself known, please make yourself known, and you're kind of listening for what the laws and the parameters of this world are. Like, I think young artists, they have so many ideas, and you throw everything of your ideas into a piece, but I think usually a piece is a world that wants its integrity to be honored. So I think a lot of the listening is, what does this world need and what does it not need? So that, and it could be that you throw away your favorite part, but that world doesn't want that. So, I think that's what the listening is finding the principles, really finding the principles of that. So, it's very close to meditation practice. It's like, it's coming back to the breath. So it's coming back to, each time, to the core of trying again. It's the trying again thing. So that's, I think, very much, you're being willing to try again and again. And so there's a kind of patience about it. I'm a very impatient person by nature, and yet I actually feel that in my work, in the long run of the work, I actually feel that I have some sense of patience, that I'll work for years on something. And even after, another thing that's beautiful about live performance is that you can always change it. When you make a film, and I have made some films, it's there, and it's really hard to tear it apart and put it back together again, financially and everything else. But in live performance, it's always growing. So I always feel like, a very dear friend of mine said, you should have people come to your first performance and your last performance of something, because it becomes something different. It's like a little baby. It's the head's out in the first performance, like, ooh, and then little by little, ooh, ooh, and then by the last performance, it might be like a toddler or like 5 years old, and then the years go by and it ends up, becoming an adult. So, that's the beauty of it, is that it grows and changes, and you just have to trust that. The music is only an armature. Actually, all of the art is only an armature, but the real thing is the radiance. That's what I realized as I've gone along as a performer and an artist, that what it's about is this connection. That's what it's about. And we make our forms as kind of a vehicle, but the real thing is the connections. Ultimately performing is about, especially working with other people. Like I have wonderful people in my ensemble. They're incredible performers and human beings. And I think that it becomes a kind of template of the possibility of human behavior, of generosity, radiance, how you deal with each other, the interaction. We're very sensitive to each other, and we kind of know when someone's having a hard night, and we pull for that person. So I think it becomes what the possibility of human interaction could be. And I think John Cage talked a lot about that. That this is the possibility of human behavior and freedom. So I feel very, very privileged to, just be allowed to do this. And as I get older and older, I feel the way the practice, and there's no separation. Even if I'm sitting one part of my life and I'm doing my vocal exercises in another part of my life, I actually feel more and more how there's no separation between the two, and it becomes a kind of offering. And I think the other thing is, I think somehow as you get older and you realize that our lives are so short, that you're not embarrassed to say that you are using your art as an offering, and also you're not embarrassed to say that you're using your art, hopefully, to be of benefit. Whereas I think as a younger artist, nobody wants to talk about, many artists don't want to talk about it. And, it's sort of like not hip or something like that. But I think that, there's nothing to lose. And I feel like I truly, deeply want my art to be of benefit to sentient beings.